Before there was a sculptor and a doll. Before a firekeeper and a maiden in black. There was Al Hunt, Soup Eater. There is a social phenomenon known as the reverse river. To put it simply, that's what you call it when you discover a piece of media, then track it back to its source, as opposed to knowing about it from the beginning. For example, watching the 7th Fast and the Furious movie, then going back to watch the first 5. A more extreme example might be realizing there's an entire fast food restaurant chain called Burger King after buying a used copy of Big Bumpin'. When it comes to From Software, however, I don't think you can describe their entire corpus as just a river. When I first departed, I deployed my rowboat into a kiddie pool with Armored Core on a PlayStation 1 demo disc. Eventually, a friend would take me out on his paddle boat into the lake known as Demon's Souls, a game he imported but still came with a full English machine translation. Feeling confident, I would rent my own kayak and explore the river of the Souls series and its spiritual successors. Eventually, tragedy would strike, and I would soon find myself cascading down a waterfall called Broken Metaphor. Look, I played Kingsfield and I want to talk about it. Kingsfield is a series of games on the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 home video game consoles. Kingsfield 1 was a Japan exclusive, but Kingsfield 2, 3, and The Ancient City all came overseas, as well as a few other related games. Unfortunately, we used the same numbering system as we did with Final Fantasy, so the numbers were thrown off by one whole integer. For the purposes of this conversation, I'll be referring to the Japanese numbering. Also, for the record, I've played a little bit of all the games, but the only ones I've personally finished are Kingsfield 2 and The Ancient City. If I wanted to get my point across as quick and dirty as possible, I could uncharitably describe Kingsfield as a fantasy-style Doom clone. But, as you know, the goal of Please Enjoy is to appreciate things as fully and honestly as possible. And my honest feelings are that when it comes to the Kingsfield series, each individual game could be a frontrunner for the best Dungeons & Dragons campaign you've ever played. I'm not exaggerating when I say that was the single most prevalent thought I had when playing through these games. I'll get to that a bit later, but first. Kingsfield, above all else, is slow, methodical, and deliberate. It demands that you drink in your surroundings, and will absolutely punish you if you defy its one and only request. Let me run you through my first experience with this series. I wake up, disoriented on the shore of an island. I look around, noting that my body controls like a tank. Observing my surroundings, I see that I'm on the end of a pier with deep water all around me. Something tells me I'll drown if I don't have proper footing. That bears out. I wake up, more certain of myself and my 100% success rate in predicting the future. I take my first steps off the pier as a rock wall materializes before me. It seems that the concepts of time and space are not a guarantee on this island. I turn left and begin exploring. Quickly, I encounter my very first enemy in the game, a small fish. It only just now occurs to me that I should feel out my other player verbs before engaging in combat. I take a few practice swings of my sword and proceed to realize that the mixture of weapon length and funky hitboxes is going to be the key to long-term survival. Having killed a handful of fish, I turn my gaze to the next target, the Squidman. Look, you knew how it was going to end, I knew how it was going to end, but I had to stay true to my brand. I wake up. This time I turn right and meet a friendly fisherman. He engages with me for a few text boxes and I move on. Spotting a narrow path across the water, my treasure instincts kick in and I follow my heart. Across the water and up this stone tower, I find a red crystal. I proceed to play for 14 more hours of this game before finding out what it does. If I knew then what I know now, I would have immediately chomped down on that crystal and learned my first magic spell, Fireball. Instead, my poisoned gamer brain held onto that crystal thinking that it was one of those too valuable to use items like a mega elixir or something. Moving past the stone tower, I encountered 2 smaller squidmans. Still a little afraid of instant death, I avoid their tentacles and find a piece of equipment on the ground. Let's recap what I've learned so far. Fine motor control is slow and specific, meaning you have to plan where you want your body to be and the direction you're facing far in advance. The game is not going to be shy about hurting you, and, by virtue of placing such a strong enemy at the very beginning of the game, encourages you to keep a mental map of the places you've been so far so you can re-explore them later. The island isn't completely hostile, and you will find NPCs even in places you might not expect them. You can find a lot of gear scattered around the island if you're keeping an eye out for it, and provided you activate your Gamer's Sixth Sense trademark. This area serves as a pretty well-crafted tutorial, not just for the game mechanics, but for the capital A adventure you're about to have. I brought up Dungeons & Dragons earlier because I get the exact same vibes from this game as I do from a classic pen and paper campaign. Kingsfield has a story to tell, but it's entirely up to you to find it. It's important to explore the space, size up your enemies, and understand that danger can come from anywhere, and doesn't always look like a monster. You need to distinguish when it's appropriate to fight and when you should run. You've got to talk to NPCs and remember their names and locations because it might be important to come back to later. The world isn't exactly huge, but it feels practically infinite because of the twisting dungeons and secret walls you'll find absolutely everywhere. The sound of your footsteps echoing in a simple stone hallway is evocative of being in a space the same way a good dungeon master can make you feel like you're in another place through their words. Speaking of good dungeon mastering, more often than not you are rewarded even when you fail. Sure, a completely foolish mistake like walking into an obvious, well-telegraphed trap will see you dead. But more often, you'll fall for something sneaky. You'll step on a trapdoor and end up in a pit, taking you further from where you wanted to be and surrounded by scorpions. However, that pit will also likely contain a few healing herbs, a new pair of pants, and if you're lucky, a juicy magic crystal for you to increase your spell repertoire. Rewarding failure is such an underused concept in game spaces, and I don't just mean video games. I mean, like, every definition of the word game. I think the Kingsfield series looks pretty gorgeous, and I'm not even going to qualify that with "for a PlayStation 1 game." They definitely nail the tones they're going for, from simple stone castles to bright and lush forests, and they're not afraid to get weird with it too. One moment you'll be in a hallway of a coliseum, and then you open a door to find a laboratory filled with sciencey stasis tanks that are growing demons in them. In Kingsfield 4, there's this water temple pyramid thing that some Loch Ness monsters live inside. The final boss of Kingsfield 2 actually hides in some altered cyberspace dimension.
What the fuck? Look, man, look at that thing's teeth. Oh, 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 oh.
The lore of these strange worlds is there if you want it, and the narrative is as good as any of the modern From Software series. I usually don't care about lore as much as I do characters, personally, and while there are NPCs with mini arcs, you're not experiencing literature here. And to be clear, that's perfectly fine. These games were punching way above their weight class in the era they came out. So, you've got your character. You gain levels as you kill monsters, you protect yourself with different sets of armors and accessories you find in the world. That's all standard role-playing stuff, and it works great here. If you ask me, however, the most interesting skill that comes from adventuring is perception, and in this game it's entirely on you. not quantified by a number on a character sheet, but how well you use your eyes and recognize patterns in real life, and you will never feel more clever in your existence than when you spot an ambush or recognize a way to kill a group of monsters or just solve a puzzle. You need to keep your eyes not only ahead of you, but on the floor and the walls and the ceiling. Jesus Christ! Long-term survival is about intuition more than it is having a cool sword. Furthermore, being intuitive is a great way to earn cool swords. The combat in these games feels dated, but it also feels very intentional. You can absolutely see the roots of the Souls design here. One of the early grumps most people have with Dark Souls is, "Why does it take so long to swing my sword?" Well, it's because From Software wants you to think and consider a lot of things before you press the button. As it is in 2020, so it was in 1994. You've got one button for weapons and one button for magic. Both are dictated by stamina bars. Attack, and you have to wait for them to fill up before you can do it again. Pressing the button commits you to a period of being vulnerable. You'll want to consider the environment, spacing between you and the enemy, the distance of both your attacks, whether or not you're going to back up off the edge of a cliff, all of it. An actual thought I had while playing this game was the combat kind of reminded me of The Witcher. After you put some hours into this series, the idea of approaching a monster from its side, taking one swipe while pirouetting around to face something else and throw a fireball at it, becomes so second nature that you don't even really have to think about it. Pirouette isn't just a button on the controller or something in a skill tree, it's something you get better at doing by doing. One more layer to this is that every enemy has its own habits and hitboxes. The same tactics probably won't cut it from room to room. The first thing you'll learn is going to be the classic run at the side and then back away maneuver. Eventually, you'll start fighting some goons who know how to swing their weapon sideways instead of just straight up and down, and you'll be forced to put some new moves in your arsenal to deal with it. Finding and remembering the sweet spot of every jerk who crosses your path is another one of those technical challenges that gives you a sense of satisfaction when you figure it out and execute on it. As far as how the game plays, I don't really have much more to say. However, there's plenty of small moments in this game, and I want to highlight a few. You know how when someone's talking to you about their D&D campaign and they aren't talking about entire plot arcs, but are instead telling you about the small moments that punctuated it? Kingsfield is exactly the same. This series is practically an anecdote generator. I think the most straightforward example I can give you to set the tone is this. While exploring, I found a small church. Inside, there was some guy. I talked to him and he says, "Boy, there sure are a lot of skeletons around here. Sure would be nice if somebody came and busted up those old bones so I can go and see my family." So I go around back and I start whacking skellies for a few minutes, no big deal. After cutting down a few skelemans, I return back to the church and find the man has already been killed. It's actually kind of striking because NPCs don't tend to get to interact with the world much. Here's the real kicker though. I move past the graveyard in the same direction the man was going to be heading to see his family, and there's nothing there. It's just a broken bridge, and even then, it's a bridge I've already seen the other side of at the very start of my adventure. Even if the man had lived, there was nothing waiting for him. If he hadn't died, the only thing he would have gotten was misery. Generally speaking, that level of despair stacked on despair is exactly the tone FromSoft wants to set in their games. On the other hand, they also know how to play a good joke too, like filling a small room with 16 skeletons that pop out of the ground. It's one of those things that will probably kill you the first time you see it, but even if you die, you can't help but laugh at the absurdity. It's great. Speaking of that broken bridge from a moment ago, there's another thing I love about these games. The maps are layered onto themselves in such a satisfying way. You'll often spend half an hour in an area that bends and twists in on itself and completely ruins your sense of direction on purpose, but then all of a sudden you'll open a door and spot an incredibly recognizable landmark, and chunks of the map will click into your head. Your senses not only return to you, but they're sharper than ever, and you commit it to memory without hardly even trying. Not to get too into the weeds here, but this is actually a trick Disney uses in their theme parks. They place large, clearly identifiable structures called weenies at central points, so you can always orient yourself no matter where you are. Things like Cinderella's Castle or Splash Mountain are big structures that practically divide the sky into two pieces. It's simple but incredibly effective, especially when it comes to video games where the disconnect between the player and the character is literally a dimension wide. It is entirely possible to miss boss fights in these games. The main story path doesn't require you to see everything, and that's part of why exploration is so fun, because you're doing it for the sake of it. It's kind of thrilling to think that there are huge encounters tucked away in the corners, just waiting for you to find them, or in some cases, hoping you won't because you're just some asshole with a sword. One time I opened an unfamiliar door and saw two sets of glowing eyes staring back at me. This goblin was a new type of enemy, faster than the undead warriors I was used to, and actively dodging my sword. They were small enough though and went down pretty quick. Just the two of them were only a moderate challenge. After killing them, I scrounged around for a bit and continued onward, until... That actually leads me to the final thing I want to talk about, which is the sort of spiritual connection to the Souls series. And I'm not just talking about the fact that the series share a few proper nouns like Moonlight Sword or the dragon called Seath, well, mostly. Kingsfield 4 absolutely has the famous forlorn soldier just being his sad self at the very start. You talk to him and he gives you a sob story about watching all his companions die in front of him. More to the point though, that trick with all the goblins in the dark earlier was a classic FromSoft move. They present you with a new problem, but it's not that hard to overcome. Then, after turning a single corner, they taunt you with a clearly visible, bigger problem that you know you're going to have to overcome to advance. Kind of like this pit. You know you have to get that shiny thing, and the designers know you have to get that shiny thing, so why even bother with the pretense of hiding the enemies? They're just sitting there, staring at exactly where you're gonna be, ready to eat you, and you just have to deal with that. From Software likes to design very dreamlike worlds that feel like they're absent from time and space, and that's actually presented pretty well in these games. Sometimes you'll be outside and it's pitch black, and then you walk through a short cave and it'll have you emerging in the middle of a cloudless day. Ice caves will be next to pits of lava, NPCs will be chilling in startlingly close proximity to deadly squidmans, or tucked away in an antlion nest performing the same task for what may as well have been eternity. Popping in and out of these surreal moments actually makes it feel like you're playing a book of fairy tales almost, which I think contributes to that sense of having an adventure. That's about all I have to say for Kingsfield. I absolutely could talk for much longer about the individual games, but for this video I wanted to give a general impression of the strengths of the overall series. I'm probably gonna end up saying some variation of this in every episode, but it was both very interesting and fulfilling to play these old gems after spending hundreds of hours with the games that came after them. So, I'll sign it off here. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked what you saw, please consider interacting with the video by clicking the like button or subscribe if you haven't already. Also consider checking out my Twitch channel where I'll be playing the games I research for this video series, among other things. And finally, if you've got a game you'd like me to enjoy, shout it out anywhere you see fit. Thank you very much, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.